So the topic I would like to talk about for this chapter is actually going to be esophageal cancer, and so we'll go over what actually transitions some of your epithelial cells into cancer cells, and some of the things, some of the anatomical things going on with our esophagus, and some of the things going on with the superior parts of our stomach. So the first thing to take into account is the inner lining of your esophagus is lined with epithelial cells. Epithelial cells are anything in contact with air or liquids. So the outside of your skin, these are simple squamous epithelial cells, and they're actually keratinized simple squamous epithelial cells that make them more resistant to abrasion. And then the inside of like your GI tract and some of your open organs are also composed of epithelial cells because they're touching air or whatever's in the lumen of the organs. So in esophageal cancer, the main thing we see is what we call metaplasia. Metaplasia is a transition from one type of epithelial to another. So in the esophagus specifically, we see in the more superior parts of the esophagus, we have some of that keratinized, stratified squamous epithelial cells, which is kind of thick. And then as we go more inferior in the esophagus, we see it transition to what we call more of a columbar or smaller cuboidal shape. And so what happens when we have something like esophageal cancer is we have things that mutate these epithelial cells. So more prominently in esophageal cancer, it's acid from the stomach coming up into our esophagus, and that's what changes or metaplasias our epithelial cells. So a lot of times some of these taller cuboidal cells will transition into columnar cells, and some of these simple stratified squamous epithelial cells will transition into cuboidal and then eventually columnar epithelial cells. And that's not what we want at all. Columnar epithelial cells in the esophagus is what transitions into esophageal cancer. So now we talked about how stomach acid can transition these types of cells into columnar cells, but the way stomach acid gets into the esophagus is through gastroreflux disease. So there are a couple of things that may increase your chances of developing gastric reflux disease or just cause you to have acid reflux on its own, independent of an actual disease. And one of the main ones I want to talk about is a hiatal hernia. So a hiatal hernia is a hole through your diaphragm where the top part of your stomach, known as the fundus, comes through the hernia, and that allows some of that acid to go through your pyloric sphincter, which is your superior sphincter of your stomach, into your esophagus. And once it translates up into your esophagus, that's when you can see things like metaplasia of cell types.